You can sell them a package. In order to do that, the packagers want to take people whose work has already been shown to be successful, usually because it's been on broadcast or cable. So it's difficult to get on a major streaming service if you weren't already on broadcast. Now you can jump over all of that and then go to YouTube directly or go to Vimeo. Vimeo is much more of, it's much more like a theater, because if you're on Vimeo, you have to let somebody know that you're on Vimeo. They have to come to it. On YouTube, it's much more of a place where you'll search and discover stuff. And you can go there. You need to do that in order to attract anyone but your friends and family, which is not an insignificant reason to be on YouTube. It was the original reason to be on YouTube, was to upload stuff that really only your friends and family really care about, like your birthday party or something like that. But it's increasingly become an actual theatrical showcase. What you have to do is to use your social media and create knowledge and appetite for your product in some way by making it attractive and making other people talk about it. So the art of doing that is evolving. We're still in the very first stages. The very best people who do this are experimenting right now. There's no Bible on how to do this correctly, but the best people, the best work being done in this area is by people who think highly strategically, who think like advertisers and marketers.
One of the most innovative and unique documentaries ever made was Vertov's Man with a Movie Camera. What effects did that documentary have on other documentaries throughout history?
Did you see Man with a Movie Camera?
Yes, we saw it.
Oh, so what did you think?
It's really good.
Is it not insane?
Yeah.
It was kind of confusing at first, but then
It's totally confusing.
Yeah.
you like...
It's totally confusing.
And then Mr. Mack explained the imagery to us a little bit, like the blinds with the opening eye, and
Yes,
it was
symbolism.
sensory overload almost.
And that's what he wanted to have happen. You know what happened when he showed it? Did he tell you about that?
No.
Well, Vertov was a kind of a wild man. He made it when he was very young, too. He was still in his 20s, I think. And he made different kinds of films later. They didn't all look like that. But at the time that he made it, he had this vision that they were just going to blow up cinema. And cinema had been structured around the expectations that people had from going to plays and going to vaudeville. So the notion was people will come out and act and do something in a fairly confined space and tell a story, and it'll be a story that makes you cry, makes you laugh, or makes you go, oh my gosh, what a vaudeville show does. And he's like, are you kidding? We are filming real life. It could be so much better. It could be something entirely different. Why be a derivative of a form that was limited by what was on stage? Blow it all up. Go out there. Just go out there and find out what the world is like and bring it back to people. And of course, there was no vocabulary for doing that. And he was experimenting with a vocabulary. So one thing you can look at Man with a Movie Camera and say is, it's one big experiment. Okay, what could we do if we had a bunch of money, which he did from the federal government of the Soviet Union? He got all that money because he was a leader in making nonfiction film, which they were brand new too. The whole government was brand new and the whole art form was new. And then the notion of doing political art for the government was brand new in documentary form. So they were like, well, Dziga Vertov. And do you know what his name means? His name means spinning top. He made it up.
Wow.
Yeah, his real name is Dennis Kaufman. So he makes up this name like it's a, it's like it's a YouTube name.
Yeah.
It's like I'm Mr. Spin. That's how cool I am. So he makes up this name and he's inventing stuff, and they're like, oh, you're wild, you're wonderful. Okay, we'll give you a bunch of money and you make one of the films that will be made for the 10th anniversary of the founding of the Soviet Union. And of course, the Soviet Union was founded with the notion that we are going to reinvent society. We are going to reinvent the human being. They had something called the new man. We're just going to invent the whole notion of what it means to be human again. So he's inventing language for a new cinema at the time that they're inventing the new, and so he's going to go document the invention of the new Soviet human being with the new camera, with all of these new potentials. And it's blowing the top of people's heads off in the art world. He was constantly talking actually to people all over Europe who were also experimenting, and they would show parts of each other's work to each other, and he was taking all these ideas for people in Europe, and they were taking ideas from him. And so then they show this movie, and people are like, what was that? And it shows like a week in Moscow, and people were like, I didn't get it. I don't like it. It was not a good story. I brought my wife. She didn't get it either. And they basically shut it right down. They don't show it a lot. But it remained this shocking, amazing, wonderful art experiment for other artists. And it has been a fount of creativity for other artists. So we have a famous filmmaker, Martin Scorsese, who's made many great American films, and he was shooting, I think, Raging Bull, and with Robert De Niro, one of his leading actors. And they were coming home from a long shoot, and they decided to go to a video store, which was how, in those days of making Raging Bull, people were watching video. And they saw this film, and they were like, well, we've never heard of that. Man with a movie camera, that's some classic thing. Look, now we can watch classic movies on video. How cool is that? But what is it? Let's just watch it. And he said they watched it all the way to the end, and they stayed up all night talking about it. They were going to like relax into some like good old-fashioned story. They thought like in the old days people had not been as cool as them, right? Like they were innovators, and like in the old days people had made slow, boring movies. And they watched this thing, and it blows the top of their head off. And they're like, look at what you can do. And I think it's still having that effect. And you don't have to love everything you saw, and it doesn't have to make sense to you to really get a sense of, look at what is possible with this form. And I think that's the big achievement of Dziga Vertov, is to make people think twice about the conventions that they use. There was another really huge moment in the history of cinema, and I'm just stealing some from my book here, a documentary on documentary film. But there was another huge moment in the 1960s when cameras became much more portable. When filmmakers saw, and it was actually after World War II, and there was this spirit of innovation happening after everybody survived World War II, and there was a transformation going on in the whole world. All these nations became independent, and many, many more people were involved in government than had ever been involved before, including all over the world, including here. The civil rights movement was happening. That included many more people than had ever been involved in democracy before. And that movement really infected cinema as well, and infected documentary film. And these filmmakers started inventing with the camera, and they started inventing ways to make cinema more and more portable so that they could get away from these really static frameworks that they had been stuck with when they were shooting in 35 millimeter, and they had to have lots of good lighting. And they started saying, let's film real life as it's being lived. And this movement, which was called Cinema Verite, or Cinema Truth, took its name from Dziga Vertov's project. And they didn't do that by accident. They had been inspired by Dziga Vertov. and they had been inspired by his notion of kino pravda, cinema truth. They took the kino pravda, which is Russian, they turned it into French, cinema verite.